Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Dallas-Fort Worth SharePoint and Office 365 User Group webinar. Today's topic is Windows 10 for Business, Why Now? Presented by Derek Martin, Modern Data Center Practice Area Lead at Slalom Consulting. Slalom Consulting is a platinum sponsor of the Dallas-Fort Worth SharePoint User Group, and without them we couldn't bring you our monthly meetings or these monthly webinars. So we thank them very much for sponsoring the user group and other SharePoint community activities around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Just as a reminder to everyone, the next meeting of the Dallas-Fort Worth SharePoint User Group will be October 20th at 6 p.m. at the Microsoft campus in Las Colinas. In just a moment, Derek is going to begin his presentation. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them in the chat window in the GoToMeeting webinar control panel. During the presentation, if we have an opportunity, I'll ask those questions on your behalf of Derek, but we will most likely hold the questions until the end when he's wrapped up his presentation, and then he has some more time to focus on questions and answers. So Derek, without any further ado, I'll turn it over to you, and you can begin with Windows 10 for Business, Why Now?
Eric, can you see it okay? All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Derek Martin with Slalom Consulting. Just as a quick logistical check, I want to make sure that everyone can see my screen and you can hear my voice okay. Eric, is that true? Yep, okay, great. So again, thank you all so much for the opportunity to present to the user group session today. We're going to be going through a couple of scenarios whereby we discuss why Windows 10 is good for business and why you should not be waiting. You should be working on your deployments right now. So let's dive right in. First, just a quick requisite commercial about Slalom. We're a business and technology consulting firm based out of Seattle, Washington. We've got about, founded in 2001, got about 3,400 employees. And you can see there the list of offices that we have around the country. So Windows 10 for Enterprise, it brings several features into the fore around major themes: protection against modern security threats, management for continuous innovation, allowing end users to be more productive, and allows organizations to have innovative devices for your business. But that doesn't really answer the question, why wait or why now? And for that, we need to talk about the different capabilities within the operating system that can make it compelling for organizations. First, protection against modern security threats with things like Device Guard, Windows Hello, and Passport, which we'll talk about extensively here in just a little bit, and enterprise data protection. Management for continuous integration with upgrade and provisioning that is now much more streamlined and simple, and the current branch for business, which is one of the better features of it, despite all of the questions that have come out from the community around how that will actually work. Allowing organizations to be more productive with great versions of Microsoft Edge, Office, and the universal apps that now can bring 32-bit apps as well as a corporate productivity store into your organization. And that innovative devices to make things happen, so things like Continuum, where you can take a Windows Phone device and it actually hook up to a mouse and a keyboard and a monitor. We've also got the HoloLens, the Surface Hub, several new biometrics features, and the Internet of Things. It's a continuous deployment methodology from the smallest form factor all the way up to the largest form factor. But we still haven't answered that question, but now we're going to. The answer to that question, why now, is fundamentally entirely about security. And we're going to spend the majority of our time in our session today talking about Windows 10 security. So to get started, a little bit of a backgrounder and a primer. Organizations may have many of the best security solutions in the world, but the security landscape has certainly changed since Windows 7 was released in 2009. Today, we're experiencing a revolution of cyber threats that organizations were not prepared for at the beginning of the century. The familiar threats that organizations might be familiar with are things like cybercrime. But the revolution is really bringing together things like cyber espionage, cyber warfare, and cyber terrorism. This landscape is the landscape that we have to deal with in our Windows world. And while you may be armed and prepared to defend yourself against cybercrime, cyber espionage and cyber warfare are a much different animal. The familiar attacks were focused on Fortune 500 companies. If I wasn't a Fortune 500 company or I wasn't a publicly traded company, I may not have the wherewithal and I may not have the need to worry about protecting myself. The revolution here is that attackers are going after any target, all verticals, supply chains, contractors, line-level businesses, individuals, small businesses, and predominantly it's a function of the tools of attack being completely automated. We're no longer modeled by being able to bring down a Fortune 500 company for profit, gain, or loss. We're now incented to do the most damage to the most number of people as quickly as possible. Malware vulnerabilities at the turn of the century was the biggest key to protection. Things like viruses and spyware and key loggers. But now we're talking about credential theft at scale and advanced persistent threats, which is a theme that I'm going to talk about a lot over the coming presentation. So at the beginning, as we started out in, say, 2003 and 2004, the volume and impact with regard to sophistication with the security landscape was basically what we called the script kiddies. These were the blasters and the slammers. These are motivated by mischief, the ability for somebody to send a packet over to the messenger service in Windows XP and pop up a message on everybody's computer, or the ability to steal credentials and format computers. From 2005 to current, we started getting into organized crime, ransomware, click fraud, and identity theft. And the motive really there was profit. Some of the examples that we talk about and some of the studies that we do with the FBI has really shown that 90% of the ransomware cases actually end up paying. So the people that are attacked by ransomware, including, unfortunately, law enforcement, end up paying to get their files back, which is neither good for the law enforcement agency or good for the country. But starting in 2012, we started to get an example of what the nation-state actors are going to be doing, activism and terror groups. These are brazen, complex, and persistent, and they're motivated by IP theft, damage, and disruption on a scale that we've not been able to see before, and on a scale that doesn't just target those Fortune 500, it's now targeting everyone. Great example was the SONY breach. SONY got hacked, and the malware that was used is a sample. It was designed to systematically connect to each server in a list containing usernames and passwords, and simply went out and wiped hard drives. And we think about the SONY breach and how important it was as an eye-opening exercise. This is what Windows 10 was designed to prevent. When we came back around to it, realizing what was the impetus for the SONY breach, it was a USB key. All of the perimeter security in the world can't prevent it if it comes in on a USB key, and then all the connections to the actor that was performing this breach were outbound connections. So all of the network defenses in the world could not prevent this breach from happening. And it also got into cyber terrorism. The SONY hackers are threatening 9/11 style attacks on movie theaters. This was all because of the movie that SONY was going to release. Being able to know why it happened is certainly a good first step. But how would you protect against this? Even further, as part of the SONY breach, it did serious damage to a major profitable company. Things like leaked emails from the CEO, leaked documents containing the personal information and the health information of their employees, unfinished intellectual property like unfinished movies and scripts. And so this SONY breach is a great example of that cyber terrorism coming to fold. So addressing these threats requires a new approach. The first one is we have to ruin the attacker's economic model. It can't be easy to do. If it's easy to do, there's an economy of scale here. If I can buy 10,000 credit cards and simply ship them across the internet, then I don't have an economic incentive to do anything else. But if all of a sudden getting the access to that credit card information becomes incredibly difficult, then it becomes less economically viable. We have to break the attack playbook. If this works on one computer, it shouldn't work on a second computer. And the third one, something that I'm most excited about, is eliminating entire vectors of attack by hardening the operating system to a degree. And so the mantra from Microsoft and Slalom has been, develop a security policy that goes from the inside out, and it's beyond bigger walls. What do we mean by that? Well, let's look at the past. So new challenges. With Windows 7, password theft becomes increasingly successful, and today's multi-factor solutions are hard and costly to deploy. With Windows 10, multi-factor solutions and anti-theft and phishing comes built into the operating system. And in fact, Microsoft's stated objective, and they've tied essentially their market price to, we will eliminate the password. It was no coincidence that the very first commercial the public saw about Windows 10 had nothing to do with the fact that the start menu was back. It had everything to do with the fact that we are going to eliminate the password. Data protection. With Windows 7, it worked pretty well, but it lacked integrated data loss prevention. And so you had to use third-party solutions with varying experiences on the mobile devices and on the desktops. With Windows 10, that market-leading disk encryption is increasingly enabled out of the box and is extremely manageable. When we talk about BitLocker and how third parties are actually dumping their proprietary encryption schemes and using the BitLocker encryption scheme and simply offering additional things on top of that from a manageability perspective to continue to have value in the marketplace. And data loss prevention and data separation is fully integrated into that experience. The key here is that if the experience with Windows is like the experience that folks are starting to get used to with their mobile device, i.e., all Windows 10 devices are treated as mobile devices, all Windows 10 devices are able to be containerized and secured, then we have a much better degree or a much better chance of being able to protect ourselves. In Windows 7, apps were trusted until they're determined to be a threat. There's no realistic way to detect 300,000 new threats per day, and you typically require the use of third party. And features like AppGuard, they worked great, but they still had to take a reactive approach instead of a proactive approach. With Windows 10, we've reversed that problem and said that mobile level lockdown is possible for desktop machines, and that the devices able to move to a trusted app model where untrusted apps are even unable to run. They don't even load into memory. So you're not worried anymore about not worried necessarily about grandma who clicked on a link that she shouldn't have in an email message, or the people that may have rights to install things on their desktop because they always had, but if they're not part of our AppLocker security environment, they can't. Or getting into the kiosk level things, you specify that only this app will run, or only that app will run. And finally, protecting that device security. The platform security built on software alone, it creates opportunity for malware to hide from the security solutions. So these are things like BIOS level attacks, which are becoming more prevalent, things that happen inside of what's called ring 0 of the operating system kernel, so that the malware is both persistent between reboots and happens to load into memory before the operating system ever takes hold. With Windows 10, we now have an integrated platform, and hardware security provides protection from power on to power off, and it reduces the opportunities to tamper with and hide from the system. And other things that come into play here is the code signing that Microsoft has introduced. Nothing gets into ring 0 after the BIOS hands off, except for a signed and valid Windows 10 binary. And when we're talking about BIOS, we're not talking about the old APC stuff anymore, which was great, but it was around for 30 years, and now there's a need for new things like UEFI. And if you dealt with UEFI in Windows 7 and Windows 8, you may have seen, yeah, that's kind of a challenge, but with Windows 10, it's much more fluid and dynamic. So let's go into each of those. How do we protect against modern security threats in Windows 10? We do three things. There's a model of three things. Number one, secure your identity. Number two, secure your data. And number three, secure your device. So let's dive into those. Let's talk about Target. The Target hack broke into the network using a bad username and password that the company created for a subcontractor servicing the air conditioning systems. And before they realized what had happened, the credit card breach resulted in millions of credit cards appearing in the marketplace. As a response to that, we need to get the password out of the environment entirely. And that's where Microsoft Passport comes into play. Microsoft Passport is an easy-to-deploy two-factor password alternative. It provides breach, theft, and phishing-resistant credentials, and it also goes several steps further by providing a single sign-on experience into the operating system, as well as all of your Active Directory connected applications. And if you're configured properly, it allows you to single sign on into all of your web-based applications at the same time. But none of this would work if it was difficult to manage, deploy, and use. And so they've introduced that convenience with the enhanced security. So everybody's familiar with logging into Facebook and getting prompted to enter the response of a text message, or typing in a code from your single sign-on app on your mobile device. Now, Windows ships with that experience built into it, so the act of logging into Windows is your first and second credential for that multi-factor authentication. Additionally, they've added a convenience to it such that behind the scenes, it's not just the username and password that's changing hands. That multi-factor and biometric capable experience is backed by what's called Microsoft Passport. Microsoft Passport replaces, is this username valid, is this password valid, with a public-private key exchange. So even if you're using Windows 10's PIN-based login, just the little 4-digit code to log into the operating system, that is actually more secure than a 15-character password. Well, how could that be? Because you're validating a variety of things behind the scenes, not just the PIN and the biometric reading, but you're also validating that the computer has not been compromised. You're validating that the network has not been compromised, depending on how you set yourself up, among many other things. A lot of those features work a lot better when used in tandem with Azure Active Directory. And you'll notice in Windows 10, Azure Active Directory is a first-class citizen to identity. What Microsoft has done here is they've taken the username and password completely out of the equation, but they've also enabled you to take the domain out of the equation. By federating your Active Directory domain, which resides on-premise, with the Azure Active Directory out in the cloud, you now have the ability to register devices and identity with Azure Active Directory to sign into devices in the Windows Store without a Microsoft account, and it provides a comprehensive identity and access management solution for the cloud. That Azure AD join provides you with a connected experience to your domain without the device actually being on the domain, and allows you to manage that device by controlling policies, setting security restrictions, setting up containerization so that documents and other information like email contents are secured within the Windows container itself in what are called enterprise folders. And it adds the flexibility to not have to have home PCs on your domain or be able to manage those devices from your domain. The second piece from securing your identities is securing your data. Data leakage is a huge problem. 87% of senior managers admit to regularly uploading work files to a personal email or cloud account. That's from Strauss-Friedberg. 58% have accidentally sent sensitive information to the wrong person. The average cost per record in breach across all industries is $240. If you're in the retail space, that can add up to a couple $2 billion very, very quickly when you think about Target or the Home Depot, or in the latest example, the Office of Personnel Management. So data leakage is a particularly complex and nasty problem that we need to work on. A good example is the Lockheed Martin breach. Unbelievable IP theft, confidential report lists of U.S. weapon system designs compromised by cyber spies. And if you care to learn more about that, you have to just hop on Bing and search for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. So how do we protect that data? BitLocker data protection protects the data when the device is lost or stolen using a full disk encryption system. It provides single sign-on and protection from cold boot attacks. You cannot get into the computer unless the BIOS says that the computer is not compromised, unless the operating system says it is not compromised, and that you've provided the appropriate public-private key pair. It's easy to deploy and manageable at scale, has excellent integration, performance, and reliability, and has already been submitted for common criteria for FIPS 142 specification. This means that it's good enough for government work. Enterprise data protection goes beyond just the BitLocker protection and delivers user-friendly corporate personnel data separation and containment. You're probably used to that type of containment on your mobile device, folks that use like AirWatch or Mobile Iron or Good, where you have an isolated environment on your phone where all of your data and email reside. Well, what Windows 10 offers is that same type of experience, but in a much more user-friendly way for the entire operating system itself, and enables data protection wherever your data is located. Slalom has an adage from our security practice that we really don't care where your data sits, and you shouldn't either. People that spend millions and millions of dollars in their organizations to see to it that their data never leaks from their environment are really barking up their own tree. The data has already leaked from your environment. Wouldn't it be nice if you had the ability to make sure that regardless of where your data is, it was encrypted and auditable every time someone clicked on it? That enterprise data protection also ensures that only trusted applications can access your data. So for instance, the example that we can show is copying and pasting out of a secure Word document. It'll actually prevent you from pasting it into a Twitter stream or pasting it into a web page so that you have that containerized protection even within your applications. And that protection should be similar for both mobile and the desktop. And you should be able to share that content using an easy-to-use information rights management solution. And that solution is Azure Rights Management Services. So the ability to federate your data protection with the entire world, have a simple, simplified, single sign-on experience with your employees, and be able to share sensitive data with your contractors, vendors, and other business partners, or patients, or customers, using single sign-on and Azure Active Directory Business to Consumer Federation, you have the ability to vastly increase your security footprint. The third item between securing your identity, securing your data, and securing your devices. Let's talk about the devices themselves. And first, let's go talk about Home Depot. The Home Depot confirmed a data breach because the root cause was a malware on one of its data systems that was used to protect customer data. So today's challenge is apps. They're trusted by default until a defined threat is acknowledged. And the detection methods are unable to keep up. 300,000 new signatures a day from one report. Your future depends on a platform where the app has to earn trust before it's used. And there's two paths to choose from. We have the traditional approach, which is how you've always done things. It requires additional third-party software to manage, carries an increased risk. All apps, 32-bit or otherwise, are trusted until otherwise proven that they're not trusted. Or you can use the Windows 10 Device Guard, which is a new approach. It requires a change in processing for your apps, but it offers incredible protection. So let's talk a little bit about Device Guard. Device Guard is essentially hardware-rooted application control. It enables a Windows desktop to be configured to only run trusted applications, just like many operating systems on mobile mobile operating systems like iOS. You can't sideload an app onto an iOS device unless you're a developer. Same thing happens for Windows phones. Untrusted apps and executables, such as malware, simply can't run. So if grandma clicks the link that she wasn't supposed to click, when it goes to run its malware, it just can't run. And it's resistant to tampering by an administrator simply because once device guard is in place, there are procedures and policies that control how it can be updated. And it works with Windows 8 devices running anything certified for Windows 10. I said that backward. It works on Windows 10 devices running anything that's certified for Windows 8 hardware. That's essentially a TPM module 1.2 or higher. And it essentially allows you to sign both the device and all of the applications running on that device. One of the challenges with Device Guard in Windows 8 is that if you were using your own custom-built software, you had the ability to sign your applications so that they would only run in Device Guard mode. The problem was that third parties had to sign their own software. With Windows 10, on a domain-joined computer, you actually now have the ability to sign third-party applications on their behalf for your domain. So you can authorize at a key signature level using your certificate authority, you can authorize this specific third-party app to run on my domain without the involvement of that third party who may, in some cases, not be in business anymore if it's an old legacy software. In traditional mode, they have had some improved security inside Windows 10. So things like the isolated system core protecting the operating system even if there's a kernel level breach. That's some impressive hardening if ring 0 is protected from even the kernel. Nothing gets above ring 0, or nothing gets above the kernel into ring 0. Windows vulnerability mitigations reduce or eliminate exploits, things like the ability to do address space layout randomization, so that any application running at any time will load itself into a different portion of memory on any computer. And there's some new, better compatibility in there for older applications. Windows sandboxes all universal apps, validates application integrity, and offers application control. It requires active user participation in granting rights. Now, not everybody uses Windows Sandbox, Windows Universal Apps yet, but that model for developing and using that universal app model is moving forward and is seeing a lot of great traction in the marketplace. And then, of course, Windows includes Windows Defender, which is an advanced antivirus and malware solution that allows organizations to deploy antivirus and malware defenses as part of the operating system itself. And Windows and IE Smart Screen blocks malicious websites and applications. And it goes even further when you talk about things like Microsoft Edge, which is getting there. Edge finally eliminating good old ActiveX and all of the troubles that it came with. But then we also need to talk about device integrity and securing the hardware itself. So the UEFI secure boot process prevents device tampering and ensures that the OS starts with integrity. Everything from the moment you hit the power button to the moment that the power shuts off, device integrity through UEFI's BIOS protocol prevents the operating system from being compromised. It prevents the device from being compromised. Newer TPM modules, again, these are going to be things that are Windows 8 certified and higher, provide a cryptographic processor that provides tamper-proof identity, validation, and preventing unauthorized access to sensitive information. This is actually how BitLocker gets its access. Processor-based virtualization is important because it provides isolation to critical system components and the data, and it protects itself even in the event of a full system compromise. To put a finer point on that, applications themselves all run within that processor virtualization and isolation mode. And you can see that best with things like Office 2016 and even some legacy apps. Microsoft is able to take some semantic knowledge about the application and virtualize it into a different position within the operating system so that even if the operating system gets compromised, the data within the application is still protected. And then also we've added additional biometric sensors to increase authentication difficulty. so that not authentication level difficulty, attack level difficulty, but easing authentication, and that's things like Windows Hello, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Securing your device also deals with provable PC health. So things like conditional access, blocking unhealthy devices to protect resources and prevent proliferation. So the Windows Provable PC Health Attestation is a remote service that can initiate remediation when necessary. If you're a user of like an IT pro person that's familiar with network access protection, this is like network access protection on steroids. We're not just protecting the network, we're also protecting the device itself. We deny endpoint access to anything that's unable to prove that they are healthy. And that works with domain-joined computers as well as Azure AD joined computers and devices. Intune provides conditional access based on health state claims. Other management services, that's an open protocol, other management services will come along from vendors that you know and trust, like Symantec and McAfee and Sophos, that will provide that same level of awareness in the future. Right now, Intune is ready to go to provide that level of control to devices using Azure AD Join. And this Provable PC Health initiative, it's a cloud service, and the health claims are available, like I said, for third-party network access, security, and management solutions. So an example use case is you can deny access to Salesforce.com if the computer does not have a current antivirus signature. The use cases for that are pretty impressive and quite limitless. So that really is the answer to the question, why Windows 10 now? But there are a couple of other major features. I call them the four main food groups. Security being the first one that we spent most of our time on today. The other three are mobility, identity, and serviceability. So let's talk about those just a little bit. Inside of mobility, we have new features and new combinations of the ability to manage workstations and laptops. So you're familiar with domain join, but you may also have been familiar with Workplace Join in Windows 8. Now we've introduced Azure AD Join and Enhanced Workplace Join. These are the abilities to treat any device as a mobile device that can be controlled, attest to the PC's health, provide that containerization support, and it allows people to use and access their data and their applications from at home on their own personal device or from employee provision device. There have been advances in things like direct access and application-based VPN, as well as the VPN solution itself using partners like Cisco. But the ability to not have to worry about dialing up a VPN to gain access to internal corporate resources is pretty compelling. Consumer deployment packaging is one of my favorite features in the mobility solutions. A great example is Delta Airlines, where in order for them to provision Surface 3s to all of their pilots, they literally sent them all an email that says, at your next port of call, run to the nearest Best Buy, pick up a Surface Pro, and click this link. Now, of course, we've always taught our end users to never click a link unless it's from somebody trusted, so there's a little chicken and the egg there. But the idea is clicking that link from a corporate certified email kicks off this consumer deployment packaging. Well, what CDP does is it actually enrolls the device automatically in Azure Active Directory, Workplace Join, or domain authentication through direct access, provisions applications to the device, configures it for mobile device management, and can do quite a few other things like set security policies, set encryption policies, that kind of thing. The Enterprise Mobility Suite is really what drives all of these things underneath the covers. And if you're not familiar with the Enterprise Mobility Suite, it's a combination of services that Microsoft offers in the cloud, including Azure Active Directory Premium, Advanced Analytics, Azure Rights Management Services, and then Microsoft Intune, which is that mobile device management and PC management facility. Now let's talk about identity. In Windows 10, as we talked about from the security track, Windows 10 identity is at the forefront of the operating system. You're no longer tied to a single identity because we all have multiple identities. We have our work identity, our home identity, our Facebook identity, our Google identity. And the ability to have all of those identities controlled seamlessly at the operating system level provides a great deal of flexibility to end users and consumers. That single sign-on into the operating system with multi-factor authentication support based on Microsoft Passport is a very compelling solution that allows even consumers of Windows 10 to start to look at eliminating passwords. I know my mother keeps a book of passwords that she carries around in her travel bag, and I always get on to my mother saying, "You've got to get rid of that book of passwords." And she turns around and gets on to me. She says, "You always told me never to use the same password on more than one website. So what's a gal to do?" Well, it's a reasonable question, but if you had the ability to eliminate the password entirely with the Windows 10 identity framework, wouldn't that be better than carrying around that book or using some third-party tool I myself use to keep track of all of my passwords? At least it's not a book that I carry around, and it's secured by a key fob, but it is still an inconvenience. And Windows Hello is going to be the marketing name for the secure biometric authentication using your face as a second factor. So instead of a thumbprint, it'll actually look at your face. It requires new hardware. Existing webcams don't work with it. It's actually got to have a passive 3D scan of your face. But those hardware items are coming out now. HP and Dell both have lines coming out this fall that will support Windows 10 Hello out of the box. So the notion of smiling at your computer to log in will be coming very soon. And finally, as we conclude our presentation today, talk about servicing. From a manageability perspective, the servicing environment with Windows 10 is much, much more powerful. Servicing starts with enterprise browsing. Organizations have been challenged for a long time dealing with multiple versions of Internet Explorer, old versions of Internet Explorer running in strange document modes. I'm sure all of the SharePoint folks out there in the crowd are familiar with the compatibility modes and enterprise mode viewer. Microsoft has finally drawn a line in the sand and said there will be no more Internet Explorer past IE 11. Everything is now using a brand new rendering engine, and IE 11 is it. And so enterprise browsing is a managed feature at the domain level that allows you to control the rendering all the way down to IE 5.5 of websites within your organization. So you can go through your organization, do an application rationalization, find the websites that no longer work with IE 11, and then downgrade their compatibility view to the appropriate version of Internet Explorer. One of the great things about Internet Explorer 11 is that it actually performs better running in IE 8 mode than IE 8 performs. So if you have a website that requires IE 8, you actually can see a performance increase simply by upgrading to IE 11 and putting it in IE 8 mode for that website. Obviously, when you're servicing and getting ready to think about Windows 10, you've got to think about deployments. The deployment methodology for Windows 10 is radically different than all previous versions of Windows. Windows XP to Windows 7 was a nightmare. I won't call it a disaster. It was successful, but it was a nightmare for many organizations. It took years and years, cost millions of dollars, and required extensive application retrofitting. Microsoft is certifying that if an application works with Windows 7, it will work with Windows 10. Now, obviously, the proof is in the pudding, and you should absolutely test your application. But by Microsoft coming out and guaranteeing compatibility with the operating system, that's a bold statement. It's also important to note that part of that deployment methodology is how you get Windows on your devices. Previously, when you talk about deploying a new operating system, most organizations simply re-image their PCs. Well, the problem with that is that it's very costly, it's painful for the end user, there's always a risk of data loss, and it just, well, sucks. So with Windows 10, Microsoft's official guidance going from Windows 7 or Windows 8 is actually upgrade in place. You've already got your applications installed, you've already got your printer drivers installed, you've already got everything going. Windows 10 deployment should be no more than a simple deployment of an upgrade to your operating system, just like a regular patch would do. Now, obviously, there's a lot that goes into the planning and preparation for that because you have all these new features and new things to deal with in Windows 10. But the actual act of deploying Windows 10 to your enterprise is relatively trivial. It's important to note that not every application will work. and not every computer is going to automatically have Windows 10 on it. Applications that come from the factory are going to need to be imaged with your gold image. And so Microsoft has been working very carefully internally with the System Center team to make sure that deployments and imaging of your Windows gold image is, number one, easier to maintain, number two, it's more secure, and number three, it allows you to have custom deviations based on workflows within your Active Directory topology, so that X user gets Y application and not the other way around. And the most controversial piece of it, which I always wait till the very end of the conversation, is dealing with servicing. What is Windows main branch for business? 99% of all Windows Business or Windows Enterprise customers are anticipated and encouraged to be running on what's called main branch for business. What that means is every time a patch comes out, the way that Microsoft is servicing Windows 10 is that every patch, with the exception of device drivers and security patches, are cumulative. Meaning there's no more, I'm going to take this patch but not this patch because I've got to check application compatibility, or I don't think I want that patch for whatever reason. All patches are cumulative. In main branch for business, however, Microsoft has taken application compatibility to the next level because it sits behind the consumer branch, slow ring, fast ring, and internal flighting candidates within Microsoft. So by the time a patch actually makes it to a Windows 10 enterprise workstation, there's about 700 million PCs around the world eventually that will have tested for any major gotchas. But of course, as is prudent, you should absolutely have a Windows 10 lab in your environment where your lab environment runs on main branch for business fastering so that you get the application updates or the cumulative updates for the operating system as quick as consumers do. You have time to validate that your applications do work with it, check for any regressions, and then by the time the patch hits main branch for business, you'll be able to go ahead and roll that out. You do have the ability to delay a patch in main branch for business, but you can only delay it for 12 months. Once you delay it beyond 12 months, you will not be able to apply any additional patches until you apply them in order from the previous cumulative update. The nice thing about that is, though, is that because there's only one update per month, barring security updates that roll out earlier, since there's only one update per month, you don't have 85 updates that you have to deploy. You can deploy them relatively quickly into your environment. For those organizations like nuclear missile silos, bank ATM machines, and the president's laptop, there is a long-term servicing branch that is intended simply for those things, extremely high security environments that will receive only security updates for the 10-year lifespan of that branch. An enterprise long-term servicing branch was declared on July 31st. It's actually the RTM build. The next long-term servicing branch you'll see, and it has a 10-year life cycle. The next long-term servicing branch that you will see will probably be sometime next year. It will have a 10-year life cycle. And you have the ability, if you're running the long-term servicing branch, to skip a single long-term servicing branch and go to the next one. So you actually can delay a long-term servicing branch update for quite some time before needing to deploy them in order. And of course, what would be Microsoft without dealing with a little bit of licensing? The model with Windows 10 is a little bit different with Microsoft licensing. You certainly can, and many organizations will continue to license Windows at the device level. But Microsoft has introduced a user-based CAL model. Actually, they introduced it with Windows 8, but improved it quite a bit in the intervening time. And that user-based license model can be paired with a solution called the Enterprise Cloud Suite, which provides access to a lot of the Azure features that we talked about here today, all for a easy one price per user feature set. So that is my spiel on Windows 10 and why organizations should be talking about it and deploying it now. One last point that I'll make is that from Microsoft's perspective, organizations should absolutely be deploying their labs right now. Slalom has been building a competency around this since January, and so we'd certainly love to chat with you guys about how you can effectively deploy Windows 10 in your organization. And with that, I will turn it back over to Mr. Schutz for some Q&A.
Derek, thank you very much for that. That was an excellent presentation. I appreciate all the information that you shared with everyone during that presentation. We do have a question from the audience. Leslie Franklin asked, I've had challenges with keeping identities separate. For example, having O365 sign on for my employer and another for Microsoft as a business partner. When I sign on as one, it is very difficult for my browser to forget, and I have to start browser in privacy mode. Are you aware of any plans to allow for multiple identities on the same device?
That is a great question, and something that we suffer with here at Slalom as well. I have no fewer than 15 different Office 365 tenants that I have to go in and out of. The answer is a resounding yes. That solution requires a significant back-end change to Office 365, and it is in flight. It's not quite ready yet, but I have seen examples of it. It's essentially taking the reliance of the cookie out of the mix and relying on Windows 10 to provide some of the guidance to the browser on who are we talking about right now. That is going to be coming in the future. Unfortunately, I don't have a timeline for you, but it is something that many folks do struggle with. It is going to get better. Unfortunately, I can't give you too much of a timeline right now.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So for anybody else who has questions, please submit them to the questions and answers panel. We do have a few minutes left here. We'd be happy to answer those questions for you. Derek, I have a question that I was thinking about while you were talking about the identity situation. When I went to upgrade one of my machines to Windows 10, I had some difficulty with the having to enter a PIN, not being able to back out of that process and connect it to the account. Have you, in your experience, how has the enterprise reaction been to the whole PIN concept and this idea of moving beyond the password? Are they amenable to that? Are there some growing pains with that? Or are people struggling with how they're going to implement that? What's your take on the situation?
We've seen two very divergent reactions. The first reaction is glee, because the #1 IT support request continues to be password resets, and Microsoft would love to just get rid of them entirely. It's much easier to remember a 4-digit PIN and a biometric, or even just a 4-digit PIN, than having to deal with a very long, complex password that has to change every 90 days. Behind the scenes, it still is effectively leveraging a password. It's just using a one-way encrypted hash of that password that's on your workstation. The other response to that is a little bit of fear. How is it possible that a 4-digit PIN is more secure than a 15-character password that has to have, an uppercase, a lowercase, a sample of your blood, and various other things about it that are difficult to remember, guess, and/or put into the computer? The answer to that is several-fold, and typically when we're having that conversation, we're talking about we're talking to CISOs, the security folks. We talk about how Microsoft Passport works under the covers, that it's no longer just an exchange of reversible hash to an Active Directory domain controller, or effectively an authoritative bind. We're now exchanging a public-private key or a certificate into the operating system and providing single sign-on into multiple applications at the same time. So we're actually increasing your security footprint by eliminating the password to begin with, because now you don't have multiple usernames and passwords. And in an organization, let's say you're in a marketing department, you have a corporate Twitter account. Well, you don't want to give that Twitter account password out to so many people. So you actually can tie that into the Windows login. It says Susie Q on that device, when she logs into her computer, she gets access to the corporate Twitter feed to post on behalf of the company, but I don't ever want her to see the password, and she never would. And so when we talk about that value prop of #1, how it's more secure behind the scenes, and #2, what all it lights up for the security professional to get excited about, it becomes a very easy conversation.
Excellent. So we have another question. Does Microsoft plan on partnering with online services such as banks, credit card providers, retailers, etc., to integrate with Windows Hello so that separate passwords don't have to be maintained for those sites?
Well, the questioner has definitely spoken to one of my biggest frustrations. I bank with a certain firm with green lettering, and the length of their passwords is 9 digits and never expire. And I just think that's just appalling. It's absolutely available now for organizations using business to consumer in Azure Active Directory. From an enterprise mode, any application that's written in SAML or written with SAML awareness or OAuth can leverage single sign-on through Azure Active Directory. There's some 2,400 applications out in the portfolio now, but you can add any third-party application that you want. It just requires a little bit more tooling. Inside that portfolio of 2,400 applications, there are already some banks that are mostly targeting at enterprises. However, you absolutely can expect to see things like Windows Hello, multi-factor authentication, Windows-based authentication for consumer-side applications coming probably, in the next year or so, while people have got to, sit around, think about it, figure it out, and then they're going to have to retrofit some very old operating systems that, some of these applications have been around for 15 years now. I think of another website that has all my investment stuff, and its password's even worse. It's 6 digits and can't contain an uppercase letter. It's just crazy, some of the restrictions that people put on these passwords. They're all over the place, and so absolutely there's a valuable proposition to be made to eliminate those consumer-grade passwords into finances, shopping, those kinds of things. And you'll start to see those, I think, probably within the next year.
So speaking of legacy applications and hardware that's out there, what do you tell an organization that has 20 or 30,000 PCs deployed that, whether we like it or not, still has a number of XP clients out there, some Windows 7, maybe a whole mixture in between? It's a pretty significant change from those platforms to move from Windows 10 in terms of user interface experience and bringing on new capabilities like the whole Windows Hello sign-on, and that's a big strategic shift for those users. How are companies dealing with that transition process?
It's a great question. It is a generational change in how we look at the operating system. There was a Dilbert cartoon that showed different generations of the world, and how if you're around 60 or so, how would you like to operate between two people? Oh, let's go have a conversation. And then the next generation was call me on the phone. The next generation was send me a text. And now you've got a generation that's send me a tweet or a direct message or Facebook me. And even newer, it's send me a Snapchat. To the point that it is relevant within the enterprise, it requires a great deal of thought and care towards deploying Windows 10 because it does move their cheese. While the interface looks strikingly familiar between Windows XP and 7, there is that start button, and now it's also extended over into the Windows 10, and you get the start button back. It still provides a change in how they behave, and it requires a change in how they operate from a day-to-day basis. And so whenever you deploy Windows 10, we try to encourage IT organizations to think about doing this with your users as opposed to your users. And in that vein, you have to educate them. You have to train them. You have to put things in place to prevent users from doing bad things. But when they figure out or accidentally do a bad thing, the system is there to catch them and help them along the way. So keeping that in mind, it's very important to train, advocate, prepare your users, because it is different. It's not something that you, even though technically you can simply roll out, it's not something that you should do to your users. You should do it with your users.
One final question for you regarding developers and universal apps. I'm a developer. What is there in Windows 10 to really get me excited about universal apps. Bearing in mind, we've heard this story before. Silverlight was supposed to be the universal app platform. That didn't quite work out so well. So what's the new excitement? What is Microsoft telling us to really get us excited about building universal apps?
Well, first and foremost, the main pieces of excitement are the ability to take, with a very low level of effort, take a website, and this gets back to one of the original questions, or one of the previous questions was, what about these consumer websites? And I want to work with Windows 10. You can actually take a consumer website like a bank, and you can create a Windows 10 universal app that takes advantage of the security and authentication using a framework that is freely available out on the internet now. And so organizations that have websites can create universal apps out of their websites. It's not just an iframe. They're able to actually integrate and use the functionality in the Windows runtime that you would be used to seeing in like an ActiveX control, but without all of the legacy garbage and without all of the security risks, because it'll be sandboxed and provide you with access to things like the hardware in a controlled manner. So that's the first one. The second one is the bridging software that is now available. So iOS applications, Android applications, you can now relatively easily port your iOS and Android applications to Windows Universal applications using an app wrapper technology that Microsoft has developed, and that's got some excitement. For the app developers that are already on Windows, not to put them last, it's just how it came up in my head, the enthusiasm and the excitement should really be around all of the functionality that's built into the operating system. The only way to reach that new functionality is through the Windows runtime. And so there's an incentive there, but the incentive is also, you've got better manageability, a new monetization market in the Windows Store, a new capability with the business store, and your ability to control and govern your applications for, rolling out software to corporate purchasers. And so that Windows runtime platform has got a lot of great capabilities. It's a lot easier to develop against. It abstracts away much of the common things that always bit, like C# developers even sometimes had to, oh, I've got a memory leak here and go have to deal with it. A lot of those are now taken care of for us. So three main focuses in that regard.
Very good. Well, with that, we'll wrap up today's webcast. I want to thank Derek Martin again for presenting this on our behalf, and a big thanks to Slalom Consulting for sponsoring the user group. This was all made possible by the folks at IT Unity, who brought us the webcast and who also bring a tremendous amount of other expert content to you at itunity.com. I encourage you to go there and browse their various articles, webcast videos, and other content that is available.